What's the fucking point?
I hope everyone enjoyed their holidays because I'm about to ruin it. After a year as jam-packed full of great video games as 2017 was, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this year could do no wrong, but I don't think anyone could ever be that naive. We've seen our fair share of disappointing offerings from a variety of backgrounds, and also not exclusive to specific video games. 4K gaming failed to impress, Steam keeps churning out thousands of terrible video games, Bungie were gutless cowards, and EA had a pretty normal year, actually. The biggest plot twist of 2018 would be if EA had an uneventful year, but then they'd miss out on all the souls of the innocent. How else would they grow strong? I've spent most of this year being very cynical about a wide range of topics, and I'll be doing it now as well, but last week I talked about the best games of this year, and that was fun. So much so that I would like to take this positivity into the new year in the hope that it spreads to other people. It'll last 1 week. No one does tonal confusion quite like Sonic the Hedgehog. It's something that I've always found a little weird about a franchise starring a talking blue hedgehog and various other colourful animals as friends, that also frequents a storyline involving some kind of interdimensional supervillain and their otherworldly powers. I hate to compare Sonic with Mario because it doesn't paint Sonic in a good way in the slightest, but at least Mario embraced the goofiness of the series with its tone. Sonic Forces gets it half right by having you design your own playable character, which feels like the culmination of over a decade of DeviantArt being really creepy. But the story is this super serious tale of resistance fighters and edgy villains. You can't have both, Sega. These cutscenes don't work with my botched science experiment. I wish that was my only issue with Sonic Forces, but in a year that showed how incredible Sonic can be in 2 dimensions, the failings of 3D Sonic have become all too obvious. So you've got 3 different characters to play as, which is cool, but each of these characters having wildly different physics associated with them is platforming suicide. Inconsistent acceleration among these characters makes it very hard to feel comfortable, especially since you barely get 3 hours worth of campaign to work through before you stumble over the finish line. It's not the worst Sonic game ever made, but it did feel like a waste of money, and in a year where you're sport for choice over what great game to play next, Sonic doesn't stand much of a chance. Also, word of advice, it's probably not the best idea to have a direct contrast between Sonic Mania and the classic portion of Sonic Forces, which was fucking awful. It doesn't make you look good. Reboots have gotten a bad rap over the years for ruining lots of things in pursuit of starting again with a franchise, and because brand recognition will make you a lot of money. But I think it's helpful if, like me, you weren't hugely into Mass Effect the first time around. If you want to soft reboot that franchise, that's fine by me. You go right ahead. Just don't fuck it up. Oh god, you fucked it up, didn't you? Mass Effect Andromeda wasn't really a game I was waiting for or anticipating with bated breath, but I was able to acknowledge that a fresh start for a franchise that previously existed as a separate trilogy might not be such a bad idea. Mass Effect 3 had its dodgy ending, so maybe starting again with a clean slate is the best way to ensure that you're not picking up the pieces from the trilogy's shaky conclusion, or leeching off of what made those 3 games compelling and somewhat iconic. So to summarize, in theory, great idea. Unless you do everything in your power to make it terrible. I've heard Mass Effect Andromeda being described as divisive, which I feel is tremendously kind for comfortably the worst game in the franchise. The facial animations got a lot of flack for barely looking human, and I can understand why that might serve as a distraction, but there are far more gaping holes in Mass Effect Andromeda than some poor outsourcing. BioWare may have sharpened up some of these doofy faces since, but they didn't fix the stilted voice acting, or the fucked up menus, or the abundance of glitches, so it's still painful to play. But it is genius, you see, because now Mass Effect 3 looks like an incredible video game with one of the greatest endings of all time. I joke, but I kind of want to play Mass Effect 1 again because of this game. Lord knows we're not getting any more new ones now. Kickstarter has had an interesting few years. It's still horrendously exploitable with no guarantee of quality beyond a few trailers and endless empty promises, but when people and developers use it properly, you can do wonderful things with it. I was genuinely thinking about putting Yooka-Laylee on here for proving that a game made with a fan's sense of wonder and entitlement might not produce a game to the highest level of quality. But I played it recently and came across at least a few things that I found enjoyable. It's not quite Mighty No. 9 levels of terrible, and that's fine by me. 2017 also saw the release of a game called Inner Chains, which came through Kickstarter with $18,000 worth of backing as a spooky first-person shooter with VR support and atmospheric locations. Or that's what it was supposed to be. Well, at least it looks good. Like, really, really good for a game made by a small group of people, and I think that explains why Inner Chains does more in environmental design than it does as a video game. If half of the dev team are artists, then you kind of lose out on creating some gameplay that doesn't feel accidentally comical. My favourite is shooting your electricity gun at a guy who has the same weapon, but you can't kill him without both of your guns overheating, so you have this awkward pause while both of your guns cool off. There's a distinct lack of feedback from the gunplay since the AI doesn't give a shit about anything, and it feels like your guns do a random amount of damage. It doesn't matter one iota how well built your world is if the game portion of your video game is laughably underdeveloped and dull as shit. Weirdly, it kind of works as a walking simulator at the start. Just don't pick up a weapon and you'll be fine. Nintendo's efforts to regain the trust of third-party developers after the Wii U flattered to deceive took the form of sending the Switch dev kit to anyone with even a modicum of coding knowledge. This allowed multiple developers to spend a fair amount of time with the Switch and determine what could be done with its hardware. This time around, they didn't have to worry about developing a game that got the most out of this clumsy piece of plastic and could instead focus on optimizing a game within the Switch's capabilities. This is why we got a lot of ports this year, because they're pretty safe. Kind of hard to fuck them up. Porting a game to the Switch is an opportunity to introduce portability to a game that had previously never thought about it at any point in its development, and this has been incredible for the likes of Doom and Rocket League, which I can now play away from a TV, on a sofa. While there's family around, I can just play Rocket League and be really casual about it, and that is wonderful, but things can go awry if you're not paying attention. Some developers weren't paying attention. For every Doom and Rocket League, there's games like Rime and WWE 2K18 that lag like a monster during even the simplest of set pieces. I should point out that I'm not one of these people who have to have the finest graphics and the slickest frame rates to enjoy a game, mainly since I fell in love with Team Fortress 2 despite playing it at 15 FPS on an old laptop. But I've come to expect a certain degree of competency and consistency when it comes to the performance of certain video games. Rime is pretty bad, but mostly came in reliable spikes. WWE 2K18, on the other hand, consistently struggles to do anything without the on-screen action grinding to a halt and begging for mercy. In a way, there's almost something artistic about a wrestling game running so poorly that it looks like slow motion, because the wrestlers end up throwing kicks and punches at the kind of speeds they'd never be able to do in real life. You can feel the tension ramping up as every wrestler takes twice as long to reach the ring. It's just like a ballet. When you've got a funky new console with impressive technology, you need to figure out a way of explaining all of it to the idiot masses, because we don't know shit. The Nintendo Switch is mostly fairly self-explanatory with its gyroscopic motion controls and sometimes pointer controls, but then there's HD Rumble, which is strange. It's effectively a way of using the rumble motor inside a Joy-Con to give more information to the player about what they're doing, like how many ice cubes are in this virtual glass. The easiest way to demonstrate this is to release a game that takes full advantage of this feature, and to release it for full price and without any kind of structure beyond playing any one of these random minigames. That last step is very important. It's been said many times over before now, but 1-2 Switch would have benefited a lot from being bundled in with every Nintendo Switch as a free taster of what this snazzy new console can do. Wii Sports was a similarly basic demonstration of the new technology and worked well as a bundle game. But even Wii Sports had more going for it than 1-2 Switch. Steep pricing aside, it amazed me just how boring this party game is to play. Before I owned it in the comfort of my own home, I played a few rounds of a handful of minigames at the Switch premiere back in January, and honestly it wasn't that bad, but I think you can only enjoy 1-2 Switch in short bursts. Any longer and you slowly realise how little there is to do here. You can only milk a cow so many times and still find it funny. Horror games have never been as popular as they've been in the last 5 or so years. Now that YouTube is an arms race to see who can be the loudest, most obnoxious human being alive today, the webcam horror let's play is seen as a golden opportunity for a budding studio to get their start in the industry. You never know, maybe you'll be the next Slender or Five Nights at Freddy's. I'd say it's worth a try. I think anything that inspires people to make video games should be celebrated. Even if people screaming their lungs out isn't really what I would consider entertainment, it gives these games a platform from which they can then grow further. But it does put the emphasis on a certain type of horror game, mainly the scary ones. It's only when you see an ineffective horror game that you learn to appreciate the efforts of Resident Evil 7 and Outlast 2 from this year. It might seem like an unforgiving comparison to put those games alongside something like Dying Reborn, but you can't put me in a first-person adventure puzzle game with horror elements and not have it feel like so many other games. Except it really isn't. While you can tell that people worked hard on a lot of aspects like how the puzzles play out, Dying Reborn, in addition to having a stupid name, is a very boring video game. It's trying to be some kind of point-and-click horror game with heavy overtones from the Saw movies, but there's no atmosphere here whatsoever. Room escape games work because they have some kind of payoff for all the slow moments, but Dying Reborn ends up feeling like a test of how much tedium you can put up with and still keep playing. I don't ask much from horror games, but I do expect them to be kind of scary. I am serious, I will take jump scares at this stage. I just want to feel something. Inspiration works in weird and wonderful ways. Over the years, I've seen video games inspired by nostalgia or a desire to surpass a previous game within the franchise, or maybe just to capitalize on some existing momentum generated by the latest trend. However, 2017 was bold enough to give us a game made almost entirely from irony, and I don't claim to be an expert in this field, but I feel like that's a bad approach to be taking with any video game. You need a creative spark to help drive a game through development, and I'm not sure that Bubsy the Woolly Strikeback had anything like that. It must have had something though. Maybe it's the desire to take a joke too far that drives a team of human beings to make a new game in a series as hideously polluted as Bubsy, but at the end of the day, gaming is an industry. Developers spend money to pay employees to make a profitable video game that can help their company expand. But Bubsy's reputation is so low and so damaged that making money off of the Woolly Strikeback is a very tall order. The plot twist buried deep in this pile of sludge is that the new Bubsy game is actually not that bad, but it is pretty dreary and uneventful, as well as shockingly short for a playable joke that costs way too much money for so little content. You can buy Sonic Mania for less money, which will net you a game with 3 times as much video game to play, and you won't feel dirty about it. You might even feel a need to collect things rather than ignore hundreds of balls of yarn for an hour and a half. Are you convinced yet, or shall I keep going? At this stage, there's no doubt that 2017 has been a great year for the Nintendo Switch, but that wasn't always the case. You've only got to cast your mind back to March and how many people were concerned about its lineup to see how much trepidation there was around this console. Obviously things got better, but it wasn't instant. Hey, the new Zelda was really good and would likely give you dozens of hours of entertainment without too much trouble, but you'd have your work cut out for you to convince people that they should be buying a new console to play it. Especially since it also came out on the Wii U at the same time. The temporary solution that Nintendo had in place to tie over fans and investors until the bigger titles arrived was a decently large selection of indie games. Now, some of these were really good and did a great job of fleshing out the Switch's library early on. Others were fucking terrible though. I'm glad I didn't play Vroom in the Night Sky when it came out in March, because it would have obliterated any positivity that I gained from playing Zelda. For the last couple of years, I've played at least a few indie games that make you question whether or not the likes of Steam, or Sony, or Nintendo have any kind of quality control in place so that games like this aren't associated with them, but apparently not. If you've ever wondered what Superman 64 would look like if it was made in 2007 for the Switch, except with horrible translation and if Supes was actually a magical girl who rides on airplanes, then it's the luckiest day of your life! The Superman comparison is actually harsher on the N64 game because Vroom in the Night Sky doesn't have anything close to the variety that Superman 64 had. It's just an endless slog of flying through rings while horrible middies chirp away in the background, and at times like this I do wonder why we play these video games. There was a point in time when the Nintendo seal of quality meant something. We are a long way away from that now. Not to be outdone, Sony demonstrated that they too can turn a blind eye to the quality of incoming indie games, but what sets them apart from Nintendo is that they can take it way too far. January the 12th, 2017 was the day on which Nintendo showed the world all the weird and wonderful things that their new console can do. On that very same day, the official PlayStation YouTube channel uploaded a trailer for Life of Black Tiger, and in doing so brought back gloriously stupid memories of Soul Brain Night of Darkness that had a similar level of promotion last year despite it being an abomination in every conceivable way. The difference here is that Soul Brain was swept under the rug shortly after the negative feedback became widespread, and yet the trailer for Life of Black Tiger is still live for all to see. I can only assume that they're just that proud. Though, maybe they're not, because you can no longer buy Life of Black Tiger from the PlayStation Store, which is something it has over Vroom in the Night Sky because Nintendo are clearly incredibly satisfied with that game, but Sony's offering was a port of a free Android game that would have set you back $10, so it's not much of a moral high ground. Obviously it's terrible and hardly worth anyone's time, but I think we need a game like this every year just to put everything else into perspective. Granted, I can't condone a large company like Sony charging money for this, but I am personally fascinated to see a game like this existing on such a base level. Like, it's just about a video game. Apparently this is enough for Android users because look at all these 5-star reviews. I think this joke is too deep for me. The circle jerk surrounding loot boxes this year was equal parts enjoyable and, I think, necessary. Most of the time I'm reluctant to join in with some crazed media dogpile, but the prevalence of loot boxes over the last 2 years has led to developers pushing their luck with every new game. I'm yet to hear a concrete counter-argument to the idea that loot boxes are little more than a method of exploiting the frustration that many players feel at not being able to make progress in a game at a pace that suits them, and while there were many games throughout the year that operated in such a way, none were quite as bad as Star Wars Battlefront II. The important distinction between a game like Battlefront II that isn't a technical atrocity and some of the more obviously terrible games like Life of Black Tiger is that I'm often looking for the fun factor in a game. It's a tired expression, but a game being so bad it's good actually gives you a lot of entertainment for your money as you laugh at the facial animations in Mass Effect Andromeda or your stupid OC in Sonic Forces. Video games are meant to entertain you, and every other game on this list has that going for them. Star Wars Battlefront 2's model of restricting in-game promotions that you'll grow frustrated that other players who are willing to spend real money on loot boxes can get a straight upgrade to their weapon is not entertaining in the slightest. Hey now, it's fine. I can always spend some time in the single-player mode. Oh my god, I've never been so bored in my entire life. I find it very hard to consider Star Wars Battlefront 2 as a video game. Sure, you can sit down and play a round of whatever pointless game mode takes your fancy on one of EA's laggy servers, with the reminder that hard cash is how you get ahead in life, but I'd rather support any other game than this. The fact that I had to pay money to play Battlefront 2 is something that I feel legitimately uncomfortable about because it's the only thing that EA cares for. Not creating something memorable or using the Star Wars brand as anything other than a medium for sucking cash out of consumers. EA will learn their lessons from the first Battlefront, they said. It can't possibly be worse, they said. At least they're leading the industry in something. This is RabbidLuigi, and it's easy to forget that behind all the crap that EA are pushing with Battlefront 2, that there were people who worked hard, and that there were people who had creative ideas. Battlefront 2 looks incredible, and it goes to show that there were people at DICE who gave a shit about their work. It's just a shame that EA didn't. My hope is that we learn from this fiasco going into next year. Looking ahead, I can't really see any other game that is looking to use brand recognition to promote something horrendous. We've learned nothing.